first, I would like to introduce our eminent panelists. First, Professor Arindam Banik. Professor Banik is an economist. He earned his PhD from the Delhi School of Economics and holds the position of Distinguished Professor and Associated Cement Companies Chair Professor in International Finance and Business at International Management Institute. He pursued his postdoctoral research at Manchester Business School and taught at the University of West Indies. Editor of the reputed management journal Global Business Review, Sir is now the director at International Management Institute, Kolkata. Next, today we have with us Professor Justin Robinson. Dr. Robinson is a professor at the University of West Indies, Cave Hill campus. He obtained his PhD from the University of Manchester, and his research interests include corporate finance, capital markets in the developing countries. He has written around 30 journal articles, several book chapters and technical papers, and his contribution at the regional, national and international scholarly bodies is commendable. Next, we have with us Professor Paramita Mukherjee. Dr. Mukherjee is Professor Economics and Dean Academics at International Management Institute, Kolkata. She is an alumnus of Presidency College and the Indian Statistical Institute. And she has completed her PhD from Jadavpur University and has around 22 years of rich experience in industry, academia and research. And she's also into successfully conducting consulting assignments. Next, Dr. Shahana Roy Choudhury. Dr. Roy Choudhury is Associate Professor Economics at International Management Institute, Kolkata. She holds a PhD and an MS from the Indian Statistical Institute and has around 8 years of postdoctoral experience in teaching and research in the field of economic theory and policy. And Dr. Roy Choudhury is the editor of the journal Studies in Microeconomics. Finally, we have with us Dr. Chanchal Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is an Associate Professor of Finance at International Management Institute, Kolkata, a gold medalist at bachelor's and the master's level. He earned his PhD in financial restructuring, and his areas of research interest include corporate finance, corporate governance, earnings management, and so on and so on. So let me just begin with the panel discussion. First, I would like to move on to Professor Banik. So, sir, if you can provide an overall perspective of the COVID impact on the economy as a whole, with a special focus on Indian economy, in terms of the massive concerns related to the migrant laborers, our unorganized sector, the demand and the supply shocks that we are facing. So, sir, if you can just enlighten us with that.
Good evening, and good evening to Barbados and West Indies also from India. Now, if we see the pandemic such as the corona crisis, which is basically originated from China, and why is a medical issue or the health issue is becoming and converted into a pandemic, not the epidemic, because globally it has spread across all the countries. What are the relationship of this pandemic with and how it has affected our economics and finance across the globe? One, as you know, since it's a pandemic and then the social distancing norms is a precondition. If you see any epidemic or pandemic, you start from 1918, famous Spanish flu. Until unless you have proper treatment, medicine, or you do not have a vaccine, and in those days, it was guided by the social distancing was a norm. Ancient time, when you have this kind of disruption, basically we thought that isolation or social distancing should be the norm. Now, if you recall, in 1918, we lost about, globally, India lost about, in crore term, 1.2 crore populations. Globally, it is more than 3 to 4 crore population in 1918. And most of the economies were actually agriculture driven, not industrially developed the way we see many countries are. In the process, when the problem is erupted, as you know, China created a strong supply chain across all countries. So problem erupted in China is actually has broken the supply chain so far the relationships are concerned, so the backward linkages and the forward linkages. And in the process, when because of the tourists, because of the own people who are traveling from one country to another, it has spread it. And government thought that isolation or social distancing or quarantine may be the only option, but it has a cost. We have seen, we have seen that how social distancing actually impedes the people not to go to the market, not to buy the goods and services they want. Government also is hesitant. Government is basically now strictly monitoring the situation, and it has disrupted production. It has disrupted supply chain. It has disrupted health issues. As you know, most of the economies, except the public health structure or infrastructure, is very poor. The poorest. If you consider America and UK also is the poorest. So, who are the real loser in this pandemic is actually globally we can see is the poor people. Now, how it has affected the global crisis? If you see the signals of the global, the indicators, the equity market, the commodity market, and others are on declining trend, because the crude, for example, before pandemic, the crisis, it was $80 to $90 per barrel. It has come down to 18 to 20, something like that. And economists argue that when commodity prices actually started declining, or if declines, there must be a problem in the economy. And we can see how it has erupted. Now, Rajeshri has mentioned it has both supply shocks and demand shocks. One is the problem is actually why demand shocks? Because people lost job. So they cannot buy the goods, one. Because of the government, if the consumers are concerned, they cannot go out of their houses or residential places. So they are basically impeding consumption. Majorly, so for India is concerned, only 20% of the total labor force at formal sector, they are getting regular salaries. But Indian 80% of laborers are actually on the market, and their contract basis defined by daily basis, weekly basis, or monthly basis. So they lost their job. So there is no demand for goods and services in the process. The whole problem is demand or shortfall of demand actually has started. The other extreme, why? If you see the supply shocks, consider the manufacture in Indian context or most of the developing countries' context. China is actually created a strong supply chain, and when it has actually disrupted, so whole manufacturing actually are in problem globally. So in the process, it has created a huge problem. So for countries' economy and countries' financial market is concerned. Similarly, countries' economies are concerned. This is the brief background how it has created a problem.
Okay. So as can I move on, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, as sir has already given a comprehensive idea of the COVID impact. So let me just move on to Dr. Shahana Roy Chaudhary, who is Associate Professor in Economics at International Management Institute, Kolkata. So ma'am, if you can just speak on the specific issues that the policy makers are currently bothered about mostly, and the ways to deal with those. And with a focus on the Indian context, obviously.
So, as we can see that, the internationally different, the several governments are taking different measures to mitigate this health hazard, depending upon the structure they're in. And India is also doing in that particular direction. So we have to remember that this particular, the shock waves or aftershocks that we are talking about, the recession that we are yet to face, is designed to save lives. From the health hazard that all the countries internationally, they're taking this health hazard as priority and the aftershocks. So basically this recession is sort of designed to save lives. So now coming to the point of the how it differs from the earlier causes. So earlier similar scenarios is that it's not triggered by the lack of demands per se. Eventually, yes, we know there are the loosening of the supply side linkages that Professor Bonik has also mentioned, and the supply and demand factors will have a kind of causality both sides, and it will eventually show up in the growth numbers and also unemployment rates. But per se, it is not triggered by the lack of demand, as typically we find even in the Great Depression also we have seen. So sort of designed to save lives. Now coming to the point of what are the major factors that the policymakers are bothered about in Indian scenario, is that creating refinancing facilities, big packages, will it really help? Because the MSMEs, largely they are affected. 40% of the exports are done by the MSMEs typically. So they are heavily dependent on loans driven setups that they have already incurred. So if the linkages are broken, how this monetary benefit or packages are going to help even for the big companies, help them, because another factor is that the labor intensive big manufacturing also, and also MSMEs for sure, are will also face the labor shortage. Laborers have moved, migrants mostly have moved to their source regions. So these are big challenges which cannot be really mitigated. The economic shock waves that we are talking about cannot be really mitigated by this refinancing package. Now coming to the point that which I think is going to be a big thing, a structural change you can say for the Indian economic perspective, is the laborers have gone to their source lands, which is mostly agrarian economy. Already agrarian economy was suffering a lot. And now if the packages are to be given, it is to be, I think, to be channelized to this domain, because this agrarian economy is going to be the game changer for the Indian economy. Most of the laborers, it will also help the laborers and also the agrarian economy, which was actually having disguised unemployment and many other issues. So, and now if we look at the packages that has been unveiled, even yesterday, Finance Minister, Indian context I'm talking about, unveiled big packages, 20 lakh crores as we are thinking, hearing about. So which is called the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So mostly 3 lakh crore or something like that, collateral-free loans have been given to the small businesses. A refinance facility, 50,000 crore to meet the sectoral requirements have been given to NABARD, CDB, NHB. And not only that, and also, which is, I think, very important, IBC and many other codes that is also already in place. For the next 6 months, RBI has taken measures to relax asset classification norms, and also certain kinds of suspension of the sections of IBC has been done. Now, what is the purpose? This is just to help the SMEs which are already struggling with the liquidity crisis, just to facilitate that. So I think at this point of time, the current recession, as I mentioned, is designed to save life because health hazard is the priority. We have to really talk about the inequality perspective if we are thinking from the policymakers' point of view, that how to mitigate that. So that's what I would like to say at this point.
Okay, then let me just then move on specifically to the domain of finance, and I would like to request Professor Robinson to enlighten us on how the corporates and the businesses, they are actually trying to respond to all this crisis and the pandemic and the situation globally.
Okay, again, good morning from Barbados. I think the only thing Barbados and India has in common in this crisis is the fact that there's no cricket being played in both places. Can you allow me to share my screen briefly, please?
Yes, sure.
So I just wanted to start with a few, before I get to your specific question, in terms of a Caribbean perspective, the Caribbean so far has largely been spared the effects of the medical aspect of the crisis. We have relatively low cases and deaths, but we are likely to be at the forefront of the economic fallout that's coming out of the crisis, and which has implications for how firms respond. So we see every country in the Caribbean is projected to suffer growth, to suffer a decline in GDP growth this year, from a 25% decline in Aruba, and only Guyana is expected to grow because of its new oil finds. And as we focus in on finance and the corporate aspect, one of the things I think we need to focus in on is that the effect is quite different depending on the nature of the business that you are in. So the impact on the Caribbean is driven heavily by the fact that we are tourism-dependent economies. So tourism-dependent countries, tourism-dependent parts of India are likely to take quite a significant hit, or if your business is related to that area of the economy, there's likely to be a significant impact to your business activities as a result of the social distancing measures. In terms of thinking of how the crisis plays out at a generic level and can feed into the corporate, I like to use this particular framework from famous management consulting company McKinsey, where in a sense the impact depends on the interaction of sort of two dimensions: the speed and effectiveness and control of the spread of the virus, and then the effectiveness of the government interventions. Ideally, what we are hoping for is a scenario like in box A4, something more akin to a V-shaped recovery, where the virus is contained and there are highly effective economic interventions, and then the economy responds or grows quite quickly. But there are a number of scenarios that are playing out or that can play out there. And the watchword for corporates really is uncertainty, short planning horizons, and an understanding of how this crisis can impact on your particular firm. A framework that I've been using is to sort of think of the characteristics of your industry or your line of business. So some criteria we can discuss: are large gatherings essential to your line of business? Is close human interaction essential to your line of business? Is hygiene or the perception thereof critical to your line of business? Is your business dependent on the travel, business and leisure? Is your service or product postponable or expendable? And the impact varies quite a bit across different lines of business. So for tourism and hospitality related business, the impact is likely to be very high. Sports, again, we see a high impact. But things like financial services the impact need not be that high of the COVID. It's on the social distancing measures themselves need not have that dramatic impact on the financial services sector. They may suffer from the knock-on demand effects. So in terms of the impact at the corporate level, it will definitely depend on the nature of your business. So if your business requires high contact, large gatherings, then there's a tremendous short-term impact negatively on your business. Whereas in other lines of business, there is a short-term opportunity. So the impact on the business is highly dependent on the nature of your sector and how dependent you are on high human contact versus your capacity to do business online. So for some firms, this is a nice opportunity. Online businesses, delivery services, there's significant capacity to scale up and take advantage of that. And as we move into a new normal, there could be significant demand for these areas. Whereas in other areas, there is significant immediate impact that is negative, and there's a potential for significant long-term impact. As we focus a little more on the financial markets, I'm currently working through a paper with a colleague of mine from Manchester looking at the impact of COVID-19 on financial markets across the world in a sort of event study. So quite likely, it might show up in your journal as a possible paper. And what we've seen is that the financial markets across the world from the preliminary data are reacting mainly to negative news. So we've grouped the responses into 4 categories, where you have positive economic news, negative economic news, positive medical news, negative medical news. And the responses across global financial markets have tended to be negative, where they're reacting to negative economic news and negative medical news. We saw some short-term responses to stimulus programs from governments. There was a short-term positive response, but those responses get quickly overshadowed. And I want to end my initial contribution by just putting a perspective on the government assistance programs. What I want to suggest is that as governments try to minimize the macro impact of this crisis and hence then the microeconomic impact, I think they should be guided by maybe 3 principles. Their responses should be timely. They should be targeted to areas of highest impact, and they should be temporary, because you don't want the cure to create long-term problems in terms of structural deficits and debt problems. And I would argue that in terms of targeting, that they want to focus the limited fiscal space in countries like India and the Caribbean, that you focus on public health measures. So maintaining lives is job 1. So providing the healthcare capacity, testing capabilities, and so on. I also think that assistance should be focused on households first, because there's a way in which that funds provided to households will naturally flow through to businesses, whereas assistance to businesses might not necessarily flow through to households in the same way. However, governments should see, and state and national governments should seek to focus on the worst affected businesses. And then also engage in a process of reimagination. Reimagine the next normal? So what does a discontinuous shift look like? And what are the implications for how the economy reinvents itself? So government should put some resources into imagining the post-COVID-19 economy and then seek to stimulate the reforms. So I think I'll end there for my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As Professor Robinson has rightly mentioned, that the extent of the effect of this COVID will differ according to the nature of the industry. So I would like to shift my focus, therefore, to a very important sector, the banking and the financial sector, and would like to know about the impact on this sector from Professor Paramita Mukherjee, with a focus on the Indian economy. It's not audible. Is it audible to all?
Sound
No.
is No.
Possibly it's muted.
You should correct the muted. Yeah. You're.
Hello.
Yeah.
Now it's on.
Okay. Thanks, Professor Robinson, for an insightful global scenario of financial sector. As he has rightly pointed out, financial services industry is not affected like the other sectors. But there are certain interesting things that we can discuss in the context of financial sector, especially for India. Globally, we have seen that stock markets have responded very negatively to any kind of news. As we all know, financial sectors are forward-looking. That is why if the sentiment is not good, the market will respond in that way. So in line with the global stock markets in India also, our stock markets have shown the reaction, the negative reaction, and it has come down from the BSE Sensex I am talking about. It has come down from around 41,000 1 month back to the date of lockdown. The first lockdown when it started, it has came down to 26,000 mark. However, it has recovered a little bit with the different packages that the government has announced. And there is a sign of lifting of lockdown in a phased manner. So if there is any positive sentiment, we can see that the stock market is responding in that way. But if we look at the banking sector, there are several kind of implications that we can think about. We have all seen that we could operate our banking activities. We could continue with all our banking activities during this pandemic and also the lockdown, the nationwide lockdown. So this is basically the beauty of technology that we now have. But if we look at in the longer term, the banks are going to face a problem of non-performing assets, as Professor Shahana Raichaudhuri has also mentioned. There are different measures that have been announced by the central bank, like creating liquidity. I'll just give one example. Apart from rate cuts, the key interest rate cuts, the government has also given some disincentive to the banks so that they do not park their funds to RBI by putting the reverse repo rate at a very low level, even lower than the lending rate, so that the funds available for the bank, they can lend it to the sector which needs. Okay. So apart from that, if we look at the banking sector, yes, there are many other measures that have been announced. Especially yesterday, the finance minister has announced different measures for MSME loans for NBFCs. This is going to definitely help this sector. But apart from that, she has mentioned that the prudential norms also, they are giving some certain kind of relaxations. The non-performing assets that I was talking about, it is basically if the loans do not come back, then it becomes non-performing assets. As per the international definition in India, also the definition is basically if the loan doesn't come back within 90 days, at least partly also, then we call it NPA. But the government under this pandemic has changed the definition. They have changed the definition to 180 days instead of 90 days. These are all to give certain kind of breather to all the sectors, to corporate sectors, bankers, everyone. Now, again, I'd also would like to talk about a little bit on mutual funds. That's an interesting thing. Researchers have also found, and this is a fact everyone knows, that foreign institutional investors and the domestic institutional investors, like the domestic mutual funds, they behave in an opposite manner. While we have seen during this pandemic and at the onset of the pandemic in India, the foreign institutional investors have withdrawn a large amount of money from the equity. We have seen that the mutual funds equity have not suffered that much. Though the mutual funds, in expectation of some redemption expectations, they were expecting that people will redeem their receivables. So they had to sell their liquid kind of funds. So liquidity funds are definitely affected, but otherwise it is not that the equity funds are not that affected. Now, if we just take the entire thing as a whole, one more thing I'd like to point out, Gold is also showing its probably its safe haven status, though I should mention that some research needs to be done regarding this in the context of India, because we have seen that though the physical demand for gold has come down definitely, because the trade transactions, everything is not everything is closed, but the gold ETFs, exchange traded funds, have shown a huge rise in the recent past in India. And two more observations I'll say before concluding. One is that digital payments have been on the rise by a huge amount. Once the demonetization was done, there was a shock to the economy, and some people have shifted to this. But this pandemic, during this pandemic, there is a huge increase in the digital payments, and it is going to rise in the next 6 to 9 months because of social distancing and this kind of norms. And the second thing that I must mention is that people are moving towards probably more safer investments. Like they are now, instead of focusing on mutual funds or stock markets in terms of equities, they are now focusing on buying life insurance, buying COVID-19 health insurance and things like that. So I'd like to conclude by this regarding the Indian financial sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. Next, I would like to move to Chanchal Chatterjee, Dr. Chanchal Chatterjee. So, sir, if you can speak on the impact on the investments in particular and the policy interventions that are needed for different sectors or industrial sectors to survive at the moment.
Good evening, all. All the co-panelists have already highlighted different aspects of economics and finance with relevance to the COVID-19 crisis. I would like to point out certain important aspects that come to my observation. First is all the sectors, all the industries are not affected equally. But the most affected industries include, as Professor Ravinshan has already mentioned, tourism, hospitality, aviation, retail, etc. And MSMEs definitely. Now, each industry needs a different type of, different industries need different types of support from the government for their survival and growth. As far as I understand, in the Indian context, in the recent announcement, in fact yesterday, the government has so far tried to address most of the issues of the MSMEs, and the government has given different packages to help MSMEs mostly by providing a lot of liquidities, especially loan credit facilities, increasing the threshold levels for to be called as micro, small, and medium enterprises, giving the provident fund liability of certain categories of employees on behalf of some small organizations, etc., etc. But these, apart from these SMEs, I would like to just some other measures which government has already taken. For instance, if you look at the power distribution companies, DISCOMs, government has already injected 90,000 crores for the purpose of power distribution companies, so that power distribution companies can give the pay their dues to the generation companies, and the cycle keeps on. So MSMEs part mostly taken care of. Some liquidities have already been injected into the financial industry, as Professor Mukherjee has already mentioned. But there are certain aspects which are not properly focused. For instance, if you look at the real estate, in real estate, government has so far has given nothing. Only that the project completion time period, the government has extended by 6 months. Yes, it will be some benefit to the real estate sector, but not a massive thing. There are some aspects, I think, which comes to my mind, that which may be required for the industries to grow and survive. One important aspect is the GST reform. In 2008 financial crisis, Government of India massively reduced the excise duties on different products and in different cases, and that helped industries to actually survive out of the situation, to come out of the situation. Here there is enough scope, I think, to rethink about the reduction in GST rate. So GST Council should take into account that whether wherever possible, if the GST rates can be reduced to some extent. Yes, it has a linkage with the fiscal target, fiscal deficits and all, but overall the reform in respect of GST is important. Second is, yes, there is lack of liquidity in the commercial paper and bonds market. In 2008 financial crisis, US Fed, for example, directly intervened into buying commercial papers. Some sort of interventions we may expect from RBI as well. Now, in this case, given as we say that each industry is facing a different kind of problem, but the core of the problem is the cash flow problem. So, in order to solve the cash flow problem, this kind of facilities, one is GST reduction wherever possible, one is the buying the commercial paper by the RBI wherever possible. These things will help. At the same time, I personally feel that even in pharmaceutical industry also, we need to understand, Professor Banik has also mentioned that China plays a very vital role in global supply chain. 70% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, which we call API, are actually imported from China. So that has actually interacted. So government needs to think sincerely for the investment in a well thought out investment in the healthcare sector also. And why this healthcare sector investment is important? Because first we have to come out of this trouble, and after coming out of this trouble, then we need to look at the revival of the economy in different aspects. Yes, economic revival is important, but at the same time, until and unless we don't invest massively into the healthcare infrastructure, it's going to be a very challenging task, a very challenging situation for the Indian government. And one more thing that comes to my mind, that in this scenario we are seeing an unprecedented scenario here. Some industries will have some advantages. For example, if you talk about the high-end services like education, telemedicine, those can be more or less conducted with the help of technology. But high contact-based services like tourism, bars and restaurants, those are facing tremendous problem, and these industries will take a lot of time to come to the normal situation. So these are the certain points which I thought may be important. Another aspect that comes to my mind, that there is a requirement or need of global integration for the removal of this virus, for the healthcare of the entire world. Why I am saying this? Because in the era of globalization, we all are interconnected. So if we want to come out of this problem, we have to ensure that we remove the virus from everywhere. If we do not remove the virus from everywhere, we have not removed the virus from anywhere. So always this problem will continue until unless we take this kind of measures. So I think these are the important aspects that I thought maybe GST reduction, I must say that in wherever it's possible. Government has taken most of the steps to address the problems of the MSMEs, very well thought out. But the other aspects, maybe in the next few days, government may take certain measures, may announce certain measures for the survival of industries. I'm talking about the different types of industries for their survival. That is what comes to my mind.
Okay, then we can open this floor for taking questions from the audience, I think, because I could see several questions lined up right now for the panelists to answer. So I'll just take one by one. First, Dr. Indrani Saha, she wants to know that what are the measures that have been taken by the Indian government recently. So if we could just highlight on those measures. So I would request Dr. Shahana Roy Chaudhary to speak on the same. Hello.
I think many of the points have been already discussed. Professor Paramita Mukherjee has also mentioned many points. So the things that I would like to mention is that we all know that Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, 20 lakh crores have been unveiled, and the components being that refinancing facilities, collateral 3 lakh crore, collateral free loans to the small business, and small stimulus packages directed towards the SMEs who are actually facing the liquidity problems, and they don't have social security coverages, the laborers working and the self-employed people working in SMEs. So mostly directed towards them. And the indirect measures that have been designed is that, first I would like to say that the states or the administration and the governance is a big issue to firstly prioritize on the health hazard that we are having. So basically the many other fiscal and state finance related measures that the government is taking, mostly in the line of the 15th Finance Commission, I would like to mention, is that the extending the limits of ways and means advances to the states, so that the states have cash flow in hand, so that they can take initiatives. Depending upon their own scenarios, they can intervene in the process, because different states we can see that they are facing different kinds of challenges. Migrant population are different in different states. So basically the government is taking certain kinds of measures to give more cash flow to the states, so that they can take care of the governance issues and the administration issues. And also, as Professor Mukherjee has mentioned, that indirect measures are there, so that the banks do not park excess fund to the RBIs. They put the funds to mitigate the liquidity problems that the SMEs and MSMEs are expected to face in the coming timelines because of this kind of designing of the session that I have mentioned already.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Roychoudhury. Then there's another question that do we need any change in the labor laws and about the public health of the laborers, etc. So I may now request Professor Arindam Banik to speak a few lines on the same. Sir, you are not audible.
It's muted.
This is an interesting question. I think I will request Justine also to respond so far labor laws are concerned, because I know the situation there, and we have recently decided that one, that laborers, the earlier law, when labor is actually hired for a contract, 8 hours is the minimum duty they have to serve. And then, if they are working more than 8 hours, the rule says if you work extra hours, the rates will be double to that of the normal rate. That's the situation so far international labor law is concerned. In Indian context, we have recently decided to change it, and we thought that if your rate is, say, 100 rupee for 8 hours, so something your 12 point some rupees you are getting, then extra hours will be at the same rate, not the double the rate what a labor can expect. I am not sure that how we are, and we have different pictures across Indian states. Gujarat, perhaps they have decided that if someone is hired for 12 hours, then rate should be according to the new law. Punjab, for example, Delhi, for example, I am sure Bengal, for example, perhaps it is not possible that you hire a labor, then you force them to work 12 hours, then you are paying them. And if he or she decided not to work, then there's a different consequences. I don't know, I mean, why in this pandemic time, we are going or creating this kind of uncertainties. Sometimes we explain the COVID-19, for example, you accept it is actually a foreign-born disease. Indians and others, or any country you consider, Barbados, for example, West Indies, different countries, for example, there are local people who are working abroad or foreigners came to India, they have actually impacted that is. And mostly, if you take them as a proxy of rich people, then who are the affected people is actually local people, the poor. And who are actually dying, except Europeans, basically poor people are dying. You consider America, you consider India, you consider any countries in the world. Sometimes sarcastically we mentioned that is basically passport holder versus ration card holder. This is the way we see it. In 1918, if you find out who are the people actually died, same across globally, I was going through that 1918 pandemic, same the backward people, they were actually dying because they do not have access to the public health system. Now, suddenly, we have decided that to revive the economy, this rule should be restructured. I am not sure what do you want actually. If you want the country's or states' welfare, the objective is constitutional obligation, the welfare of the states, then why are you unnecessarily, specifically in pandemic time, why you are creating this kind of debate and implementing accordingly, which is basically the right they got in sometime in 1877 in Chicago, 1st May, the right they got it. Why we have suddenly decided to disrupt it? I do not have any idea. I'll request Justin to react.
Okay, thanks, Professor. Now, India is always a very difficult country to generalize about. It's such a vast and diverse country. And as the pandemic was playing out, I always thought, because I pay close attention to India, I always thought India would face some unique challenges where anywhere from 80% of the workforce is informal.
Yes.
So social distancing as the measure to respond to the crisis seems to me to be especially challenging in that Indian environment where such a large chunk of the labor force is in the informal sector and really can't afford to shelter in place. You know, shelter in place is in a way a upper middle class type luxury. So in terms of using those shelter in place, social distancing as that response to the crisis, I always thought that would pose a unique challenge in the Indian environment. And in terms of the labor laws, I've always found that in terms of labor laws, India has some of the most progressive labor laws around the world. The challenge has always been the enforcement of those labor laws. So I would suggest that at the time, one of the key challenges would be to enforce the labor laws that you have on your books, because India has always has some of the most progressive across the globe. But many of those are not necessarily going to help the large number of persons who are in the informal sector. So my recommendation in that sense would be to focus on cash transfers, because if persons have to go out to work to survive on a daily basis, they earn money on a daily basis, shelter in place is not going to be an effective therapy for them. So cash transfers seem to me the most effective response to that group. And as I said earlier, there's a way in which so in the US, you give money to firms, you give a bailout to firms. As a member of a board, that money comes in, I can decide whether we're going to pay down some debt or what happens. But that money doesn't necessarily flow through to the consumer. But a cash transfer to a worker is not only going to benefit that worker in terms of protecting their lives and also encouraging them to shelter in place so you can contain the pandemic. That money is going to flow right back into the corporate sector because those people are going to buy food and their basics. So in India, my recommendation would be and it's easy to say, but to enforce those very progressive labor laws you already have. But in terms of the informal sector, a focus on cash transfers to those vulnerable persons. Because to me, that supports their lives but it also protects other people's lives in that they are now able to shelter in place.
Thank you, sir. Professor Robinson, with your special interest in the developing economies, I would like to also direct the next question to you as well. That how do you see the relationship post-COVID between United States and China, and also its effect on the Indian economy in this crisis during this pandemic situation?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. I see that my own sense, based on the way it has been unfolding, is that relationships between China and the US can become more tense post the COVID-19 pandemic. It appears that key elements in the United States, or let me rephrase, I guess, as someone from the Caribbean, I've always been comfortable with what I call a multipolar world. I don't have a difficulty envisioning a world where there are many powerful countries. There are many interests in the US which sort of have a very hegemonic view, in that the United States must always be dominant and not share that space with any other power. Where China, I think, poses a unique challenge is that we've had countries like Japan, South Korea, and others who have gotten rich, but they have tended to operate within the norms and dictates of the United States' broad political economy environment. China has been successful and they want to do it their own way. So the forces within the United States that have a hegemonic view that the US must always be dominant will always be uncomfortable with the rise of China. And I think the pandemic has heightened those tensions, and I expect that to be a negative going forward. I, however, see an opportunity for developing countries like India and others as companies around the world become concerned about that single point of failure in global supply chains. So China has been the world's factory. It's been a center of many global supply chains. I think companies, aside from the geopolitics, just as a corporate decision, people really raise any question, is it prudent corporate management to have supply chains so heavily concentrated in one part of the world? So I see an opportunity as firms seek to diversify their supply chains globally. And India is also on the cutting edge in terms of technology, in terms of ICT technologies as the world becomes more digital. I mean, one of the terms that I see used, buzzwords, is what people are calling the low-touch economy. A low-touch economy where, as people worry about pandemic risk, they want contactless payments and so on. And India does have some advantages there. So I see the tensions between the US and China being exacerbated and getting worse as a result of this crisis. But I do see opportunities for countries like India and other developing countries as corporations seek to diversify their supply chains and not have that single point of failure. And countries like India that are at the cutting edge of online technologies can also benefit in the emerging scenario.
Professor Banik, if you can also add from the Indian perspective a little bit on these lines. Sir, we cannot hear you. So please unmute.
Question is a political economic question. The way Justin wanted to explain that the relationship between India, China, and US is going to be worst. Maybe it's true because the way things are moving. But I don't know. The Indians are actually expecting that, as you know, the manufacturing contribution to India of the total GDP is about now 12 to 13%. So we are not doing well in manufacturing, and we wanted to be a strong player in manufacturing. Why? Because we have two extreme stories. one highly skilled population, highly productive population, and then you have large number of population is actually have a lot of problem. They are not fully literate, semi-literate. They are not employable, and perhaps this kind of people we require in the manufacturing. But then a strong density populated country, highly semi-employed or employable populations driving towards services is actually created a lot of problem in Indian society. Before COVID crisis also, we used to use the word called wage inequality in those days. Now, if we decide to come back to manufacturing, that simply explain most of the Indian electric and electrical companies, they have their own ventures is actually in China to manufacture the components, and components are coming back to India to produce the final product. The value addition of a refrigerator you consider maybe 80% from China, 20% is basically popularly known as is actually screwball technology in India, the way we adopted it. Now, if you want to break that disruption, because the relationship and then China issues, and Indians thought that they can do a good job here, and because of that reason, our Prime Minister just few days day before has declared that MSME sectors or small scales will give a lot of support to create that supply chain. Experts argue that given the problems in India, democracy, then the governance issues across states, there are differences. They said if companies who are basically located in China, naturally they may go to neighboring Vietnam, Taiwan, or Cambodia and other countries, or Thailand. Why they will come to India? Because they know India, what are the situations here. I totally agree with that if you are to a strong manufacturing nation, perhaps our initial conditions are not fulfilling. It may be a dream so far current government is concerned that in the process you can create more employment. I don't think that most of the companies who decided, for example, Japanese decided that if Japanese companies actually deserting China, coming back to Japan, they have some certain kind of incentives. Financial incentive given or awarded to that Japanese companies. If that company is not going to Japan, going to some other countries, incentives are less, but there are incentives there. The way I have gathered that most of the companies are actually in touch with Vietnam and other countries. If at all, these companies decided to desert China. And yes, this may create a lot of tensions in this region, backed by USA. How it will be a result, in Asia we will have tension then in political. One is that China is one hand, the others are basically US-backed countries. How it will be developed, what are the formal shape, we do not know. But yes, it is an interesting question. It's perhaps it remains to be what should be the structure in the forthcoming future. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. As already Professor Paramita Mukherjee has spoken on the banking sector, but still we have got another question that how the banking sector will get impacted. So if Professor Mukherjee can add a little bit more on this topic. And there is also another question on the expected inflation rate. So I would just ask Professor Paramita Mukherjee to enlighten us on this specific issues.
Regarding the banking, as I have already mentioned, RBI has already announced certain measures those are all focused on liquidity. That was by RBI for maintaining liquidity, means it's a rate cut that I already have mentioned. Apart from that, if you look at the other measures that have been announced yesterday also, it is all for MSMEs, for NBFCs through the bank route, so that they can get credit, and the banking sector is also not affected. So this is, the focus is on creating liquidity and keep the interest rate at a very low level. Now, keeping the interest rate at a low level is debatable in this condition, because generally we keep the interest rates low because the loans are cheaper, so that the corporate sectors come for cheaper loans and to finance their activities. Now, given this pandemic situation, this may not happen very soon. Maybe after a few months, when the demand moves up, then this will be required. But there is another side to it. If the interest rates are lower, my payables in terms of loan repayments and all will also be lower. So in that sense, this will help people at large and also the different financial institutions.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. Then we have another question regarding the healthcare industry, and I would like to direct the question to Dr. Shahana Roy Choudhury. That is, the healthcare industry is getting more emphasis in this COVID-19 pandemic days. What about the future development actions, especially by the government side as well as from the private side, that we can expect in the form of employment, investment, research activities, and public welfare in this domain?
So, Rajeshri, I could not hear you properly. So, if I'm correct, that the tourism industry, the question is
the healthcare industry, about the healthcare industry.
Okay.
And the future development actions from the government and the private side.
Actually, I have seen one tourism related.
So yes, the health.
Justin can answer that tourism related question. Perhaps.
Okay. I'll put that across.
Okay.
So, Dr. Roy Choudhury, can you hear me?
Yeah. So the healthcare industry, yes, it actually, to be correct. So Indian healthcare scenario, the infrastructure, if you see, was far away from as compared to many other EMEs and others. So actually, this is a kind of shock wave that we are facing for the first time, all the other countries as well. But the we were not really prepared for this. The government, public and private partnerships in their own domains with their own capacities, they are taking the challenge very, very positively, and we are learning a lot. All the private sectors and state participations that we see in respective states and in the small domains, local bodies also, they are involved to develop and facilitate how to make the system better to face such situations. So actually, yes, the fundings in the health sector are to go from the center to the states. The devolution, the kind of flows of the revenues and capitals from the center to the states are to be channelized in the healthcare for sure in the coming times, following the 15th Finance Commission flows. Yes, and the private participation is a must, and that we have already seen in the insurance and other designing policies that it has been in the PPP mode. So now that we are facing a several kind of challenge, it's a huge challenge. So of course, the private parties are to be taken on board.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. My next question is directed to Professor Robinson. That can we expect a rapid change in the international tourism sector and in global learning? And by what means? Sir, can you hear me? That can we expect a rapid change in the international tourism sector?
Okay, yes. So can you please repeat? I missed some of what you said.
That can we expect a rapid change in international tourism sector and in global learning? And if yes, then by what means?
Okay, so question in two parts. So certainly we are living a stark new reality in international tourism in the Caribbean. In a sense, our economies have ground to a halt because the hotels are all closed. All the wonderful swimming pools, the monkeys have taken over all of our hotels. So you look at the monkeys are parading. So we have so tourism dependent economies and regions are facing a unique scenario where you may have the virus under control in your part of the world, but your economy will not restart until there is international tourism. So the key to it really is, when will international commercial air travel restart? And there are many scenarios around that. The ideal scenario is that, so the most extreme view is that international tourism will not return to normal until or unless there's an effective vaccine, which is 12 to 18 months in the most effective scenario. So that really is your worst case scenario, where you do not have a return to international tourism until there is an effective vaccine against the COVID-19 virus. Other scenarios are where you have rapid testing. So persons seeking to travel, on checking in, would have to go through a rapid test, and then they're only allowed to get on the flight if they test negative. So rapid testing would also be is a more likely scenario where that can restart. And the way I think of it is, if you look back to 9/11, so 19 years after 9/11, we are still living with the security requirements that were put in place. My own sense is that as international travel restarts, we're going to see a set of healthcare protocols around international travel that are similar to the protocols that are in place to deal with terrorism threats. So I think we are hearing about 4-hour check-ins as you go through health checks, temperature checks, and so on and so forth. So international tourism, I think, is going to be muted for a while. And when it restarts, there are going to be additional costs to provide healthcare security to potential travelers. We are all in the field of education, and that has some interesting developments. Many of us have moved our classes online, so there's a whole future of online learning. My own sense is that I think for universities, the greater legacy of COVID-19, I think, is going to be online administration. Because what I found is that a number of processes that have been done administratively by persons in offices, a lot of those are now being done online. And I see that as a legacy that will be maintained post-COVID-19. I also see an expanded role for online, but I don't, and maybe that's my own prejudice, I don't think there's a substitute for the face-to-face experience. Going to college face-to-face is a rite of passage for persons in modern economies. It's where you form a number of the social and other networking links that are critical to your own personal development and career development. So I see an expanded role for online education, but I don't see it in any way replacing face-to-face education. But I think in the university sector, I see that one of the legacies could be much greater use of online technologies for administration.
Thank you, sir. My next question is directed to Professor Arindam Banik again, because many individuals, they want to know about how to deal with the migrated labor problem, our massive unorganized informal sector, and the economic stimulus packages that have been directed towards them. So, sir, if you can just throw some light on these issues. Sir, please unmute.
Thank you for this interesting question. And now, if you see the total lockdown model in the Indian context, initially, experts thought perhaps when they are trying to implement lockdown 1, they perhaps, I must say, perhaps policymaker didn't think about the migrant aspect of migrant labor aspects of the total lockdown model. And if you see how it was actually managed, a planned government is declaring lockdowns and never considered that these are the people actually coming from other states and what would be the consequences. And as we have mentioned that 80% of the workers actually informal level. The moment you have decided for lockdowns and the next day the residential spaces where they are actually staying, landlord said, if you cannot pay the rent, you can leave the house. One. Second, if you do not have the daily basis wages or monthly basis wages, how they will survive? And we have decided to close everything. And the pathetic part we have seen in the Indian context, still it is totally unmanageable. That people are dying, they are hungry, and we finally thought that recently the labor trains will be going from one city to another. I must say it's totally mismanaged. It's not managed properly, the one. And second aspect, government has recently declared, if you see the government's recent declaration, when you talk about any kind of disruption the economy is facing, we see the demand side aspects, we see the supply side aspects, which is basically defined by the emphasis. If you see the support they are giving, the manufacturing sector, technology, all those will be supported, which is basically the foundation of the supply side economies. And in this case, we assume supply side economy perhaps applicable is actually originated by Chicago School. It originated from when economy is actually not in total equilibrium or full employment. There are some disruption that you try to issue. So what you try to do, you reduce tax, then you give advantage to the corporate sector, give some incentive to the skilled population, so the economy will be in equilibrium. The kind of policy government has actually decided now. But other side of the story, which is actually demand aspects, perhaps government didn't take into consideration. Now, if this labor, who are basically millions of labor actually moving from industrial states such as Maharashtra, such as Delhi, such as Haryana, such as Punjab, such as Bangalore, such as Gujarat, when they are going to other states, how manufacturing will be revived, I do not have any idea on that. Government has declared many policies on that. How this labor, which are basically decided to settle now, go back to their parent states, how it will be resolved, I do not have any idea. And you don't have any transport, you have decided to the free loans for 1 year, you are not paying interest and all kinds of things. I don't think this is going to be or you can see any kind of impact on that until unless other issues are considered. It's a health hazard. It's not a macro disruption. It's a health hazard issue. And Hazel, as Justin rightly pointed out, I mean all the panelists have rightly mentioned that is a disruption, and then perhaps the solution is defined by the vaccine. But when vaccines are not actually, it will take time, then how this labor force will again go back to the state where they are actually migrated? Is it possible? And then we have decided to give support to those manufacturing. Where is the labor in Gujarat? Where is the labor in Maharashtra? Where is the labor in Delhi? And how it will be transported, I am not sure. The idea, the way government. So we have the biggest migrant labor issue. I'm sure it is difficult to resolve it in the near future.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think I'll be able to take up one or a couple of questions more. My next question is directed to Dr. Chanchal Chatterjee. Like, we have seen the ILFS, DHFL defaulted in general conditions of slowdown. NBFCs are highly exposed in real estate, infrastructures, etc. Will they be able to service those debentures that they have issued? Will it not directly put immense pressure on the formal banking sector? So if Dr. Chanchal Chatterjee can answer this question.
Yeah, this is a very important question. Actually, it has two parts. To be very specific, yes, it may have an impact on the formal banking sector as well. But the problems which ILFS, DHFL, which are facing for a long term because of their very high exposure to real estate, some power sector companies, etc. Now there are two aspects. One is that the loans which have been sanctioned to those real estate companies, especially real estate companies, some of the power sector companies are not coming back, so they are becoming NPA. And because of that high level of NPAs, these NBFCs are facing tremendous problems. And now, in order to solve this, I think the important part is this situation, this high NPA from real estate, is not due to COVID-19. It was prevailing before that also. So it's a very crucial problem in the Indian banking and financial sector. So the industry and the government should think why real estate companies are defaulting their loan payments. That's a very crucial aspect. That is one aspect. And second thing is that apart from the problems which are faced by the real estate companies, some power generation companies, another important issue is the governance, because we have seen in case of DHFL, the governance issues. The important governance issues, we can talk about this Yes Bank lending to DHFL and all. So those are some of the important governance issues. Until and unless those fundamental governance issues are addressed properly, it will be very difficult to manage that particular sector. So yes, in the current scenario, as we have seen that when State Bank of India and some of the prominent private sector banks have come up to to restructure or rather revive Yes Bank, and the 81 bond of Yes Bank was bonds were actually written off. So in that case, the timely repayment of debentures and all those will be some crucial problems. But here I would like to mention that problems are not because of mainly this crisis. These are perennial problems, fundamental problems with the real estate and NBFCs. The government has to think very sincerely to address those fundamental issues. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'll take up the last question, I think, and this is directed to Professor Paramita Mukherjee. Do you think that the same pace of the increment on digital payment will continue for a few months? Because then the unorganized business sector of the country will also be negatively affected.
I think I should mention one thing here. From the question, it appears that you think that people will purchase goods and services from those outlets or from those companies which offer online. So only online will be there, and no kind of unorganized business sector will be there. It is not like that. Why the digital payments are rising? Suppose for tutors or even for the domestic helps, we never think of giving them other than cash. But during this pandemic, because of this experience, because physically they cannot come but they need the money, we have given this kind of, or we have paid in terms of Paytm or this kind of thing. So we have paid digitally in whatever way. So this is why digital payments are rising. It is not that we are not buying from the vegetable sellers here. We'll be doing that. So it doesn't mean that digital payments are rising, will rise, doesn't mean that the unorganized sector will perish. It's not that.
Okay, so I think this panel discussion.
Just wanted to add, if I may, I wanted to add,
sir.
Because
I
just came back from Kenya in January, and I was quite struck with the success of platforms like M-Pesa, where you have digital payments which are really accessible to persons at the lower end. So solutions like M-Pesa, which have mass impact across the lower social strata, can be quite impactful post-pandemic.
Thank you, sir. So I think this panel discussion has been really enlightening from the point of view of the key aspects, the key industrial sectors that have been touched upon. And yes, there has been a setback, massive setback in all kinds of economies, developed as well as developing. But there is a tremendous uncertainty as what future holds for all of us. But we will like to conclude with all sorts of optimism that all the economies will rebound to the best of their capabilities soon. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It was my pleasure. Take care.
Thank you, Chanchet. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
And Rajashree also. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.